Welcome to The Score, where we make sense of hiring trends, we sort science from fiction, and find out what's new in talent acquisition from top experts in the field.
I'm Nicola Tatham. I'm the Chief IO Psychologist. I've got 2 decades of experience designing fair, predictive and science-backed talent assessments. I'm here to cut through the noise and talk about what actually works in hiring.
And I'm Caroline Fry, Head of Product. I spend my time turning smart assessment ideas from NIP into tools that work, scalable, inclusive, and ready for whatever AI throws at us next.
Each episode, we're joined by a guest to unpack a big question in hiring.
Because talent deserves better than guesswork.
Today, we're joined by Kraig Paine. Kraig is the Customer Success Director at Sova. Kraig started his career in talent acquisition. Now at Sova, he's focused on helping clients measure the impact of their projects, ensuring talent acquisition investments translate into business outcomes. He's the perfect person to help us tackle today's big question. How do you really measure ROI in assessments? Welcome, Kraig.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Okay, Kraig. So we like to kick things off with a light one. What's the strangest, most unexpected question you've ever been asked during an interview?
So I've had a fair few interviews in my time. I don't think I've ever had a really crazy one. I remember being a kind of fresh grad and being asked the question, do I want a profession or a career? Which at the time really flummoxed me because I didn't know a great deal about a great deal and I didn't know that there was a difference. And I'm not actually sure there is a difference even now. So that was a bit of an odd one. I'm pretty sure I had the very famous one years ago about a manhole cover as well. Have you ever heard that one?
No, please tell us.
Okay. So I'm pretty sure this came out of one of the big tech houses back in the early 2000s, but there was a question that did the rounds that was about why are manhole covers round?
Is this a joke or an
Anyone
interview
know?
question?
No, it was an interview question.
Why did the chicken cross the road? Go on.
Yeah. Well, supposedly it's so they don't fall in on themselves because they can't physically fall down the hole. So it's a safety thing. But yeah, I knew the answer because I knew the question before. But yeah, that was a bit of a daft one, to be honest.
Okay. Did you get the job from knowing that question?
Honestly, can't remember. Probably not.
So we will move on to slightly more serious question. So I'm going to ask the first question. When you think about why organisations buy assessments in the first place, what do you think is really at the heart of that decision? Is it about fixing today's problems or is it future-proofing hiring?
I think it can be both. I think that if you think about talent acquisition, generally speaking, it's very reactive as functions go. It's very hard to plan. I've spent a lot of my working life trying to help companies get better on that side, and it's tricky to do. It really is. So I think the reality is the reactivity brings almost like a firefighting mentality to talent acquisition at times. The conveyor belt or the hamster wheel that so many TA teams are on means that it's very hard to see much above the here and now and far into the future. So I do think through no fault of most TA teams themselves, a lot of the buying decisions around most TA enabling products, including assessment, where we obviously sit, is normally based around solving sort of the here and now and the immediate 12 months ahead issues, which are synonymous across the industry still. You know, it's still typically time, cost, quality with a few other bits around the edges, which no doubt we'll chat about today. But yeah, I think ultimately people are still buying to solve them. That said, there's always exceptions. There are organizations out there, either in an industry that allows them to be a bit more strategic and a bit more planful, or they're just in a more mature space and perhaps are buying for the site further ahead, in which case, from an assessment perspective, clearly it's about predicting better hires and talent into the future for an organization. I would say both, but if my gut would say a bigger proportion in just the here and now.
So it would be fair to say that ideally it would be about the future proofing, but in the reality, it tends to be about fixing the immediate term problems and plugging the gaps.
Yeah, I think so. But I think it's multifaceted, isn't it? Because if from an assessment perspective, we can try and add the predictability to help drive better talent and better quality in that stays longer, reduces attrition, et cetera, et cetera. But linked to that, to be able to do that, you need to know what you need to hire, which is the real challenge for a lot of organizations. And in the age of AI and everything that is getting so much attention at the moment, sometimes we don't know all the skills that we're going to need. So it's difficult to predict the hires we need, let alone whether they're going to be good hires if we don't know what we're hiring for necessarily. So, to give TA teams their kind of defense in this very rapidly changeable world as well, I think it's difficult to buy for more than 18 months out into the future at the moment because we still don't know what we don't know sometimes. Which is why skills hiring and stuff helps as well.
Exactly where I was going, which is why it's so important to think about, what will still be around in the future, and what we know will still be around is change. So it's looking for those people that are agile and keen to learn, all of that great stuff that you're looking for in your talent. Even if you might be recruiting for the here and now because you need people that can do the job, but longer term, if they're going to thrive, then you need to be looking for those characteristics and those skills that are going to be around for the longer term. And with any of the assessments, when we're designing assessments with clients, we always do try to build that element of future proofing in, acknowledging that there's the recruiting for the here and now, but what's this job going to look like in 2, 3, 4 years' time? And we'll bring in visionary interviews where we'll speak to leaders of leaders that can see what the strategic direction is of the business. So, in a contact center, for example, off the top of my head, there might be about sort of problem solving right now, but the problems that contact center staff are going to be resolving in 2 years won't be the same because AI is going to be picking up a lot more of that. So we can look at what those sort of longer term qualities are that we're looking for. So it's really interesting subject, but completely take on board what you're saying there. I think Caroline's got the next question.
I do. And in a way, to me, it's kind of related. So that kind of ambiguity sometimes of what you need now and in the future of fixing those problems. ROI is kind of another element of that. Like, what is the true ROI, or is it different in different contexts? And a lot of TA leaders obviously have to measure ROI, but also the day job gets in the way when you're doing in that firefighting mode. So my question would be, what's a realistic step for someone who's never measured ROI before? And I know that's a huge question because, first, what quite could be ROI in all these different scenarios?
ROI is huge for us on this side of the fence because obviously we want to help a customer understand that there is a point to them working with us and the consequence has been far better than the starting point, and ROI is one of the mechanisms to do that. Well, put it this way, I've never had a conversation with a peer or a TA leader that they don't get why ROI is so important. I still feel like sometimes it's not in the nice to have camp, but it can be pushed into the too difficult to figure out right now camp. So everybody appreciates they should have it, they want it, and at some point in a buying cycle, they're going to need to do something around it. When procurement or finance come knocking and asking for justification around spend and stuff. But, in my mind, it needs to be at the forefront right from kickoff and right from start. What are we trying to demonstrate? What are we trying to measure? And how do we know if we've done well? What is the return? Whether that's pounds and pence, dollars and cents, or it's a different sort of metric that can be, whatever it is, should be unique to that individual organization. So I think as a first step for me, it's trying to hold that idea central so that it's not an afterthought. It's the thread that goes throughout the engagement with any service provider or tech, or in our case, an assessment partner that you utilize. So right from the very beginning, you're understanding what it is you're trying to achieve, what the why is, and how you're going to measure it so that you can legitimately think about ROI. And it's not a very difficult exercise because you're retrofitting it all at the end, trying to make sense of some data that maybe isn't aligned to what it was you were trying to do in the first place. So that's the first thing. The bit alongside that is it's very hard to do a return on investment or a measure of success if you don't have a benchmark or a baseline. If you think about anything that you want to compare, what are you comparing to? So if you don't have that mindset right at the beginning, I would argue, and I've seen it play out many times, it's very hard to measure progress if you don't know what you're measuring it against. And if you don't measure it at the beginning, you quite often lose your baseline because it's then moved and you can't go back in time to reset it. So they would be my two things. Get your baseline. And by getting the baseline, you're probably going to start thinking about it from the very beginning, which is what I think is really important as well.
That's such a good point. I mean, it sounds simple when you say it, but I can imagine that there's been many times that that you've experienced with clients where they've sort of forgotten that step and then got halfway through the process and then said, okay, well, now we can't evidence, the progress that's been made because we didn't capture that right at the outset.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about isolate. To me, that's product language. Like, what problem are we solving? It's the same thing, right? Like the same thing on both sides. Like that's what your ROI becomes if you can tackle those issues with whatever
Yeah.
solution you've put in place. Great. Okay. Over to
Interestingly,
you.
I think assessment is a category now. If you think about talent acquisition teams, traditionally they will spend money on possibly four things: a core system, so an ATS of sorts, attraction, assessment, screening, and recruitment agencies. And they're trying to reduce spend on some of those and are happier to spend on others. And I think assessment is one of those core categories where it's just a given that you do spend money on assessment, particularly if you're running early careers or you're running volume campaigns and so on and so forth. I wonder sometimes if some organizations have forgotten the why, because it's become a repeatable thing. Like for most organizations, they spend money on LinkedIn every year. They probably don't stop very often and think, well, why do I spend money on LinkedIn versus somewhere else? And how many things do I need of this and that and the other? And it's our job to really challenge those perceptions and get back to that why again, because then everything gets easier from that point on.
Is the assessment that we're providing them with doing what they set out, that it was set out to do, and having that data?
Keeping one more question on ROI, and obviously working in product platform, like we do have to think ahead. We think roadmaps, we think, years hence. If we fast forward a couple of years, what do you think ROI and assessments will look like? What will organizations be measuring that maybe they aren't today? Or do you think there's some core fundamentals that persist, evergreen?
I do think there's core fundamentals so even if, regardless of what I've just said, time and cost per hire and quality of hire, maybe that's not the language that we'd use with our leadership team. When you boil some of those down, what do they relate to? It's generally efficiency and cost. Now, as business drivers, they're not going anywhere fast. So I think there will always be a requirement and a need to be talking efficiency, cost. And the next one for me is productivity. So we don't talk productivity very much in talent acquisition. It's quite a hard beast to nail down with what we can get our hands on from a data perspective, but productivity is generally king within a business context. So where we can dovetail into a productivity measure or return, more the better, 100%, because that starts to move the needle for a leadership team in respect to talent, in respect to how you assess your talent and bring them through. Like if we can build linkages and start to show a correlation between better assessment predicts better hires, those hires bring more outcomes, higher productivity, generates more output. You're starting to hear language that isn't talent language. This is production language. It's business language. That starts to then drive a totally different conversation, in my opinion. Very tricky with where we sit within the talent kind of process. But so back to the question, I don't think we're losing the cost, time, quality, experience and efficiency stuff, but I think it's wrapped within cost and efficiency. And I think those two, if we can move the conversation into productivity, then things get really interesting. Really interesting.
Have you seen that done well? I know we talked about this as the simple answer.
No. Don't get me wrong. I think there's a lot of people now on that path thinking this way. And I think from a hiring perspective, which we plug into and do our part, hiring in general, there's more talk now about hiring on time and hiring when needed rather than reducing time to hire. Right. I mean, I have a bit of a bugbear with time to hire. I think it's just a vanity metric that was created to help TA teams from 10 years ago sort of explain, we're doing better. Like time to hire is going down. Hold off. Like really, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if your time to hire is 30 days or 300 days. What matters is hiring somebody when a business needs it to deliver output, whether that's project or growth or whatever it may be. And we in assessment play a part into that, don't we? So it's how, for us, how do we figure out how we can tell that story through our bit as part of the sort of process chain that helps organizations start to hire people in when they need them.
It's that concept, that talent intelligence concept, where all of those data points come together. And if we can ultimately sort of share some of that data a bit more comprehensively across the journey, then we get that story to tell from where we're involved, but with the outcomes included, and can actually bake that in. But yeah, I haven't come across an organization ready to sort of share data in that way across the piece. I think.
Yeah, it
Still.
is. And it needs the TA leader to be fully bought in as well, because, we need the data that goes end to end in the process, and it does exist. Some of it will be within our platform. A lot of it exists within the wider platform. But we play a part. We play a big part in that within any recruitment process that assessment, is a contingent part of. So it's coming one way or another, and we're trying to drive the conversation with our clients around it as best we can at the moment.
Moving back into TA speak, moving away from that sort of more leadership speak. So sometimes showing ROI might focus on efficiency. Other times it's more sort of inclusion or quality. How can TA leaders balance those competing priorities without losing credibility by talking about all of them?
Well, I think I don't think you lose credibility as long as you're focusing on the ones that are important to your organization. So forget changing the word, the wording so much at the moment, but there's probably not a business out there that isn't interested in improving all of them to some degree. Given the chance, why wouldn't you reduce time, improve cost, improve quality, experience, and increase efficiency? You just would, wouldn't you? But there's normally 2 or 3 that are more prevalent than others. So they naturally get your attention and dictate where most of the effort is expended. I mean, with the big 3, I used to call it the TA trilemma: time, cost, quality. You kind of can't improve all 3 massively at the same time. There's always a casualty. If time and cost improve, quality will go down. If quality and time, cost will go down, and so on and so forth. So there's always a trade-off, and there's always a consequence of focusing on one or the other. But I don't think you lose credibility if you're focused on what your organization needs and you're going after that.
Yeah, which is exactly what I was about to say, that you were talking about, that sort of taking the organization's key directions and filtering that down. So it's factoring that into how you prioritize the triangle and beyond, looking at what the strategy is and then linking your key metrics to that. And that's where you're focusing, and that's how your credibility is retained, because you're moving in the right direction. You're going in the same direction as the wider organization.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I've got one thinking maybe beyond the trilemma. What's something you've learned from working with clients that surprised you? Maybe a way that they thought about value or success that was different from the norm?
It probably was the first couple of customers that were going down the productivity route. And if I think back, they were probably when I was like the first part of my career when I was working in TA. Some of my roles were in manufacturing, FMCG type businesses. So I spent quite a lot of time talking to production teams and manufacturing engineers and supply chain management, Lean Six Sigma specialists, all that kind of stuff. It's not a big... I used to have a lot of analogies going through my head between supply chain and talent acquisition as processes. And you can get quite geeky on it, talking about waste and, all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of similarities, really. There's obviously a huge human element with TA, but the actual process side of it. So that's where I started to really pick up on the need for productivity over certain metrics that are maybe not talking the same language. So I think some of the earlier clients or organizations I worked with or was working in at the time were talking productivity years ago. And as a sector, I think we're catching up to that now and seeing it not just as talk coming out of a Rolls Royce or a Unilever or somebody like that, coming out of retailers and tech businesses and such like as well. The other surprise is more that it's still not the first thing people think about, like return on investment. Like, how do I measure? How do I know this is working? I'm going to spend this money. I'm going to, embark on this journey. I want to start knowing from day one the foundations are set, and then in a year or 6 months or whatever, I can have a knowledge of whether it's going in the right direction or pour down or sideways or what have you.
Why do you think that is then?
I think it's a bit of what we've covered. When the house is on fire, it's hard to look at, those kind of things, which sometimes TA is like that. It's so reactive and so up and down. Some of it might be just skill and experience. It's not traditionally been... TA as a function is evolving pretty rapidly. 10 years ago, it was almost exclusively an admin coordination type function. It's becoming more strategic. The maturity is going up and up and up. And with that comes different pressures and different requirements from leadership teams and CPOs and stuff. If you get the transactional stuff better, you move into a different space, don't you? So I think some of it is just a general maturity curve that TA is on generally. And some of it is maybe picking up on the learnings from aligned functions. So ROI is language that finance understands and talks about, procurement understand and talk about. And the more collaborative TA works across functional boundaries internally, the more you're working to these kind of ideas and maybe then start to drive them yourself rather than reacting to them.
It's maybe taking us a while to get to the point where we can make that tangible and we know what those outcomes are that we can and should measure within the context of that as well. Yeah, really interesting. Right, it's time for this game now that we call Science or Fiction. So we're going to throw a few statements your way. Some are grounded in reality, others not so much. Your job is to tell us which and to help set the record straight. So I will start with the first one, which is inclusion sells, but time and cost are still the real ROI currency.
Fact. Absolutely fact. Inclusion's super important. Well, DE&I, super important, obviously, and it's had huge attention in the last couple of years. But yeah, I would say the main currency is still those two, and still will be for some time, which we've spoken about, haven't we?
Do you think? Go on, you go, Caroline.
I was just going to say, do you think some of the, not to get political, but some of the real world events that are happening at the moment in the space of DEI are going to have an impact there? Like, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, it was really a hard focus in sort of the world of TA. It felt like to me as, working in this industry, things have changed recently. There's been de-emphasis across, some rather significant world players. What impact do you think that might have?
Personal opinion, yes, definitely. The shifting landscape in the broader context is having an impact for sure. More generally, I think diversity and inclusion is difficult to measure. It's a different sort of outcome that you're trying to drive. Mm-hmm. So it's cost and time or efficiency. There's some quite hard, it's hard data, isn't it? You can grab hold of some stuff and you can crunch some numbers and churn out some results. I think a D&I agenda is harder to meaningfully measure success against because it can be qualitative as much as it is quantitative, in my opinion. Like it's trickier, but certainly, I mean, would I say I can't imagine there's a lesser focus internally within most talent acquisition teams because people are bought into the reason behind D&I being so important, regardless of who's in whatever position of power.
That data speaks for itself, doesn't it? Those organisations that have got a bigger focus on DEI are more likely to be ahead of the game on so many of those metrics that the board might be more interested in. So.
Yeah. So, I mean, hopefully the cultural stuff has taken over now so that even if you can't advertise it to the same degree, it's just culturally embedded in a lot of places. But I suppose we will see the consequence in a couple of years of that.
Science or fiction? If you can't show value from assessments fast, you're wasting budget.
Fiction. Yeah, fiction. Particularly with assessments, because there's some stuff you can probably learn quickly, but some of it is slower burn. At the end of the day, a lot of people buy assessments for validity and prediction. Prediction is inherently about the future. So when it comes to assessment validity, it's linked to quality of hire. Quality of hire is a difficult metric to get your head around, and it relies on following those hires through the course of their career, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. That sort of a return you can't possibly know within a couple of months. It does take time, which coming back to the ROI thing, it needs to be embedded at the beginning and it needs to be followed through. You can't stop. It needs to be an evergreen kind of initiative.
The next question comes from me. TA leaders love shiny tools more than solid outcomes.
Am I allowed to say both?
I think you can.
Absolutely. You just did.
I think both. I think it depends on the TA leader. I've definitely met TA leaders where, one shiny tool to the next without really embedding them properly and getting to understand the value. And I know plenty that are the opposite of that, and it is all driven through driving outcomes. So
with the right
both
tool, it doesn't have to be. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. Yeah. That's what we're all trying to demonstrate to our customers. Just because something is new and shiny, it doesn't mean that it doesn't produce a solid outcome. So I think that does
Absolutely.
support what you're saying around the both answer.
Okay, next one, science or fiction. Finance teams, not TA, are the ones who really decide what ROI looks like.
Both. I think historically more so. Historically fact, nowadays hopefully more fiction. In another couple of years, hopefully completely fiction. How about that for an answer?
Yeah. Okay, I'll take it. Yeah, I think, yeah. Well, ROI is really complex. We've spoken about it, threaded throughout this, and it looks different in, pretty much every organization. Yeah, I think there were probably some, both. Yeah, I buy into your vision. Hopefully, with the TATs can get there.
Fingers crossed. They can. I know they can.
Final one. No success metrics equals guaranteed project failure. Science or fiction?
So I'm going to say science for this one, only because if you don't have metrics and measures, you can't know if something has succeeded or not. So if you can't know if something has succeeded, it is inherently a failure, would be my argument towards that. However, if you think about something like a recruitment campaign, success ultimately is hiring, hiring the bodies you need in the roles you need when you need them. So that is a success, even if you haven't necessarily done the work we've been talking about in terms of tracking and then tracking ROI. It's almost like that might be an initial success that leads to somewhat of a failure that's never really realized because attrition's through the roof or whatever after 12 months. But yeah, in its truest form, if you can't demonstrate success, how can you say it's anything other than failure?
Okay, Kraig, thank you for your insights, and thanks for sharing your perspective on many things, ROI, how TA leaders can be strategic with their leadership teams or boards if they ever get in there. If there's one thing that you want to remember, listeners, to remember from this episode, what would it be?
The ROI is important. Try and embed it right from the beginning. Don't overcook it. Start simple and set your baseline as quickly as you can. If you don't set your baseline that you're measuring against, you can never really measure return. So definitely set your baseline, definitely get on the front foot with it and be proactive with it. And then it will then inform everything thereafter.
I support what, it's been great listening to your perspective, Kraig, and reiterate what you were saying there about keep it simple and understand what your baseline is. And let's hope that this is a real growth industry, and let's keep having those conversations, in the roles that we're in, working in partnership with our clients to help them identify what those metrics are, finding ways to make them measurable so that we can link them to the processes that we're putting in place for them. So yes, interesting times.
Yeah, and Kraig, I really liked your thoughts on productivity. I think that's something really, it could be really engaging to get into. Like, again, I see the challenges because I think the brief conversations that we've had about those kinds of measures and getting the data, not easy, but it's something to aim for. And I think going beyond that kind of, I think what you said about time to hire as well is really resonates. Like, right on time, real time, like that makes sense. Not just a metric for a metric's sake that you're meeting repeatedly. And I think that goes across everybody who ever has to work to metrics. Like, what are we trying to prove? What are we trying to identify? What outcome can we base off measuring this? I think is.
And that is
really
a really good point. That's the metric for the sake of a metric. When we're doing research studies with our own clients and they go, we've got this metric, throw it into the pot. Like it's great, but it's a metric that's got, 2 points on a scale and it's not really relevant to the skills that we're measuring in the assessment. You might have it, but it's not necessarily useful for the research that we're doing to try and help you prove that this assessment is doing what it's meant to do. That can sometimes look like a fail when you're not seeing the figures that you want to come out, but it's about identifying those metrics up front that are really important, not just using some data because it just happens to be sitting on a database somewhere that we can use. And that's about having these really good conversations with our clients and our partners early on in the process.
Yeah, it's like all data for data's sake isn't really helpful if you don't know what you're measuring or why you're measuring it and what you're going to do with it after. Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thanks for hanging out with us on The Score, Kraig. And
thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. If you enjoyed this conversation on ROI and the value of assessments, don't miss what's coming next. New episodes drop every 2 weeks on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your talent acquisition insights.
Is that a wrap?